And so tonight, the topic title might be a bit vague, the God reset, but literally let's just reset, restart over. Okay. And that's the reason why I said that is because there was for me personally, we went to a men's class yesterday, and there's, just an area seminar. It's specifically for men. And the pastor that was preaching mentioned church kids, and he talked about them having no idea what being born again is. And that I connected right away because I grew up in church, and I had all of this, history, right? 30 years of history, and of a building or a build up in my own home as a child, and growing up in church, regularly in church, involved in church as a teenager, doing the various things that the church does. And so when it came to the idea of being born again, technically speaking, I was kind of dropped in the middle of this scenario, and my brain woke up in the middle of this scenario to try and figure out, how do I begin? And the reason why that clicked for me is because when somebody tries to figure out God, you have to start first with God. It's really hard to start in the middle and then try and fill in all these gaps on the outside. It's like somebody dropping you in the middle of an advanced math class and then saying, here, try to figure out how this all works. You kind of have to go back to the fundamentals, as it were, or the foundations, right? Yeah. And so when you think about the Bible, when you think about God, when you think about Christianity, the best place to start is with the issue of God. And then I'll talk more about being born again in a minute, but if you were able to just start your life over, and God was able, he could give you an opportunity to literally just say, you could start fresh, you could start clean slate, start from the beginning. That is essentially what being born again was for me. That's what God spoke to me about. Jordan, I will give you a new start. And so I want to kind of define three things, and we'll kind of work through them. The first thing, just working through the issue of God. You can be academic, you can be scientific, whatever. I literally, for people who have a struggle with the existence of God flat out, but there's obviously a curiosity. If you're listening to this podcast, there must be a curiosity. If you're listening to this podcast and you've listened to it before, maybe there are questions in your mind. Does God really exist? And you're struggling with that in your own mind. I hope to answer at least, maybe not, yes, God exists and now I know for sure, but maybe give you the right direction to go with it. And so I have had a lot of conversations with Pastor Ford over the years. We've known each other for actually quite a while now. I was thinking about this the other day, with like 16, 17 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. And we have had a ton of conversations, and I've listened to him have conversations with other people about the existence of God. And I really do kind of want to dig into that. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That's the Old Testament. Very, very beginning. John, the New Testament, John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you have this explanation of the beginning, and they both start with God. That word beginning literally means preeminent, before everything else, and it literally, in the New Testament anyway, means has the priority, which is a very interesting way to look at it. So let's prioritize things and just start with the existence of God. Why does the existence of God make sense?
Well, what's interesting, this isn't my observation. This came from a book that I was reading. But the Christianity, well, particularly the Bible, as far as all holy books, is the only holy book that mentions that there was something before time. So it's the first holy book that mentions the beginning, the creation of time, because it starts with in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so that's it. So there was a beginning, and it says in the beginning God. So the Bible gives you that frame of reference right in that first sentence, that God created time. And what I think is...
Wait, I'm sorry. I meant to ask the crowd a question first. Okay, I'm sorry. Hold that thought. I wanted to ask you guys to maybe give us from, now you don't even have to personalize this, but give us some reasons. There are a few folks listening right now, and I'll put this in the chat so the question's there for anybody that joins afterwards. But the question that I have for you is, what are some reasons people struggle with the existence of God? Just throw it out there, and hopefully that can give us a bit more of a talk point for practical things. But sorry, so go ahead. So
Yeah, so that's a starting point as far as religions go. The only religion that talks about time being created is from the Bible. Okay, so the Judeo-Christian origin. The one of the things that to me is very, very interesting, and I've mentioned this a couple of times and I've kind of danced around the edges of it, but I'm going to look into it. I'm going to probably talk about it Sunday morning in my sermon Sunday morning. But the idea, because my Sunday morning title is going to be God equals MC squared.
I had a
And
feeling we were going to hear quite a few sermons out of this.
well, not quite a few. I'm going to deal with it in one.
Okay.
But just you know, I just the more I think about it, how amazing it is that so the Einstein's general theory of relativity is God saying, "I created everything." Because the idea, the general theory of relativity, the whole idea of relativity is the idea that everything is related to each other. So we live in a universe that is not accidental. There's no way scientifically that you can come to the conclusion that the universe is accidental, because everything in the universe is interrelated. And so if it was accidental, these things would be disconnected. They would be unrelated to each other. And the formula, which I'm not going to go into it now because I'm going to go into it on Sunday morning, but the formula E equals MC squared is very, very interesting, because these are things that are related to each other, and they are not obviously related to each other. And this is what's very interesting about this, is that literally when Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, E equals MC squared, there's one of the elements in that formula is just out of the blue. But I'm not going to go into the details of it right now because I want to save it for Sunday. But it's interesting because I'd actually started to look into this and say, you know, that element is, what's the point of that element, you know, and the things that I discovered, and then also getting into a argument with ChatGPT about that particular thing, saying there's no relationship between these things. And ChatGPT kept coming back with, they are related to each other, but they're not related to each other because it's easy to see. You know, it's not like clouds and rain. You know, you can observe rain falling and you think, well, where's the rain coming from? Well, it's coming from clouds. And then so we start doing some research. It's condensed. So clouds, so the water goes up into the sky, it condenses and then falls as rain. And so we know, okay, so that, you know, water comes up from here from evaporation, condenses, becomes rain. Yes, all that makes sense. So that whole cycle, you know, makes sense. We understand that. But the formula, E equals MC squared, even after you know all the parts of the formula, it's like, but this part doesn't even matter. So to make that, to use that, so that, you know, water condensing, creating rain. And that's the reason why Mars is orbiting at the speed that it is.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so well, but my point
Yeah,
being
yeah.
is that there's no direct relationship between those things that we know of, okay, or that is even obvious.
Right.
Well, what I'm saying is that the whole formula E equals MC squared would be like the discovery of some thing that is happening in the universe that is a constant that is happening in the universe, and it's related to other things in the universe, but they're just related. And so it's like I said, it's hard to. I'm trying to dance around it because I don't want to come right out and talk about it because it's amazing. It's absolutely astounding, and it makes perfect sense to me why Albert Einstein had such a problem with quantum mechanics. Because quantum mechanics, the idea of quantum mechanics, is that things can have they can have there can be random effects. Random things can happen. There can be random occurrences. And because his discovery was, no, I have touched the tip of the iceberg, that there are things that don't seem to be related to each other, but they're definitely related. I mean, they are scientifically, provably related to each other, that they don't look related to each other, but they can actually be it can be tested and proven that this thing has an effect on this thing. And it's like they're not related to each other. They shouldn't be related to each other. So why do they why do they follow this relativity? Why are they related to each other? And so those are two reasons at a scientific level, that prove the existence of a God, not the God of Christianity. Prove the existence of God is the creation of time and the relationship that the universe has to its various components. And so, but having said that, and I'll be the first to say this as well, or quickly to say this, is that doesn't make a blind bit of difference, in terms of people believing in God. Because this other book, which I highly recommend, and I'll be saying that a lot over the next couple of probably days or so, because it is astounding. It's called Imagine Heaven, and it's written by a guy who has collated near-death experiences and given them has extracted the commonalities, and so he's kind of categorized the different things that people say, and it doesn't matter their religious persuasions; they have similar experiences. The ideas of seeing a bright light, colors, various things. So these things that people have in these near-death experiences, they're clearly having the same experience. They're a very similar experience, even though they are from different religious persuasions or no religion. And actually, for some, it's what had tipped the scale from that moved them from atheism to a belief in God, even to Christianity. And so it's just very, very, very clear. And because that's the whole idea of the sermon that I'm going to be talking about, is the Bible talks about how the earth declares the glory of God. And so it's very clear, it's there for those who are looking for it. But for those who aren't interested, they not only will they not find it, but when they find it, they will reject it, because they don't want God to be part of the equation of their existence.
Yeah.
And so even if they saw it face to face, it would be a thing. One individual, which was interesting, because almost every person had mentioned about how their encounter with this being, this supreme being, everybody who had this encounter felt unconditional love, and even were holding hands, with this supreme being, and feeling this love, this unconditional love. But yet, when they came back from their near-death experience, said, I am, one of them even said in this experience that they had met Jesus. They knew they had met Jesus. They had felt his love. And then when they came back, they said, but I can't accept Jesus because I'm Jewish. And so that was the end of the story. That for them, that was the end of their near-death experiences. They've had this near-death experience, and they say, I cannot accept this, even though they identify that this was not a dream. It wasn't, it was a near-death experience. They had some kind of afterlife experience, but because they are dedicated to being to the Jewish religion, they cannot change. And they have to reject that, which is very interesting, because to experience that and then to reject it. And then there was another atheist who had felt a similar sort of thing and was said, I was uncomfortable with that unconditional love, and so therefore I felt obligated to reject it because it felt uncomfortable to me. So
Yeah.
so
So,
these are.
so let me ask the question this way. So what you're describing then is that the existence of God per individual depends on them
Well, no, what I'm saying is
or
that
their understanding of it.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you prove the existence of God. It's not going to change what people are going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I mean, is that even if God revealed himself to people, that isn't going to change their decision about who God is.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll come kind of back to that a little bit, but I want to go through some of these and just see kind of your responses of them. And you can go as fast or as slow as you want through. And we only have,
Yeah.
a little bit of time, obviously. But okay. So there's some great reasons, and I've heard these in conversations on the streets, and I'm sure you have as well. But the first is they can't see him. This is one reason why people
Yeah.
struggle with the existence
Well,
of God.
that's what I'm saying is that even if they did,
Yeah.
they would still reject him, because it's not seeing is not believing, because believing is not, it doesn't have anything to do with our senses. It has to do with our frame of mind. And so the idea that people, if their senses encountered God, they would come to God it's not true, because they wouldn't of their own free will. In other words, so if that's all it was just God's unconditional love and there was no judgment and God revealed himself, people would still reject him. They would still reject him. It wouldn't make any difference, because they don't, which is interesting, because it shows us about how we were created, and that we didn't just evolve, because there would be no logical reason, to reject, unconditional love. There would be no reason to reject that. But the fact that there are people that do that, just it shows, that we're far too complicated to be an accident. And that's the real problem, is that the implication that we are an accident implies that we are at our simplest form in order to exist. And so, which is not true, because if we were at our simplest form, then we wouldn't have these extraneous, nuances, that make us human.
So next one is bad things happen that make no sense.
Okay, so that's interesting, and there is, yes, but again, like I said, I recommend, and so if you have an Audible account, it's free, and so I would recommend to get the book. I would recommend it in any case. It's well worth it, because he actually talks about people who have had near-death experiences that have experienced horrendous pain in life. And when they have this near-death experience and come back, they realize that and Paul talks about this, that the present distresses are not worthy to be compared, to eternity and to where things are going to be in eternity. And so there's a very powerful reality about that, is that the idea in our minds right now, we don't have anything to compare right now to, except our own imagination. And so we could say, life would be better if I didn't have to experience the problems that I'm experiencing. But what you can't say, or what what is true, but you can't say because you haven't experienced it yet, is that the pain that we're going through right now is worth going through right now in order to fully experience what it's going to be like to have eternal life. Because the horrors of this life are only going to serve to enhance the glories of the next. And you could say, well, what if you didn't have that? What if you didn't have that element? What if you just were able to do? Well, that's the thing. You're talking about diminishing eternity, because that experience, the experience of pain and suffering that we're having now, is what is going to, like I said, it's going to amplify eternity. When we go into this state of existence where things are perfect and there is none of that, it will only amplify the quality of eternal life. So the things we're going through now are going, when we get there, it's going to be like, wow, this is, I would have gone through way worse in order to have this.
Yeah, that's actually a really good comparison. I never quite heard it put like that. Okay, next is same as Clarissa and Mariah. That's not an answer, and I said it. You can't steal answers. You got to come up with your own. Okay, can't prove the existence of God.
Well, again, that's, goes back to that, what I said before, is it doesn't matter. That's not a determinant, because even if you could prove the existence of God,
Scientifically, sorry.
well, like I said, you scientifically, there's more evidence that there is a God than there's not. But even if you were able to prove scientifically the existence of God, it wouldn't make any difference. It just wouldn't make any difference. It isn't like there would be a lot of people going to church just because we know God's real. That wouldn't be the case, because people want to experience their own reality. And that is really the determining factor, is that the question isn't whether or not God exists. The question is, are you willing to put aside your own version of reality, in order to live according to God's existence, and that's really the question when it comes right down to it, because that's why there are people who become Christians. They've been a Christian, some for many, many years, and then they make decisions in their life that are anti-Christian, and knowing the truth from their Christian experience, but they still make those decisions, and then they justify those decisions by claiming that they no longer believe, and really all they're doing is just choosing, they're opting, for their own version of reality. So I really want to emphasize the fact that the idea of God not being provable is not a deciding factor for anybody.
So if somebody said that and said, yeah, like I've just, the idea of God is just too confusing, like the way scientists, which typically are atheists, the ones that we're talking about, that say this kind of stuff and push this kind of theory, is they preach it more as a truth. It's not, they're not.
But like I said, it's immaterial.
So, but my scenario is based off a person trying to consider both and going, there's so much, really what it comes down to is there's so many reputable people saying that there isn't a God because I'm a scientist. And I think I think it depends on your definition of reputable. If you mean reputable, meaning that people know who they are. Yes.
That's one thing. But, if you're talking about reputable from the standpoint that this person is a proven,
some kind of integrity behind their
integrity.
No, that's not what I mean. Because
that's
let's
not
be honest,
true at all.
The majority of common people that are considering science versus religion are going to think about it from that standpoint.
But,
do I know who they are? I don't know who you are. I know who this is.
Well, but but the thing is that it doesn't,
So is there such a person though that's literally in the middle and confused by science to the point where they're unwilling
Nobody's
to make a
confused
decision.
by science. Everybody has decided that they want to live their version of reality, and that's all there is to it. That's what it comes down to. There's no such thing. I've heard debates and seminars given by supposed seekers, that have just not found any sufficient evidence to convince them that God exists. And then when you hear their arguments is often the rejection of plausible arguments. It's not they're not saying, yeah, these arguments are not valid. It's like, okay, well, that's a plausible argument, but I still need more. And that's what they're saying is that it's the question is not the plausibility of the arguments. The question is very simply that they just they don't want God as part of their reality. It's as simple as that. And often if you boil it down, it usually comes down to the same things. It's really at a much more emotional level. Is they can't answer the question of, if God's real, why did I have to live the way that I lived? Why did I have to experience what I've experienced in life? Why did I have to go through those things if God's real? And that really is what it is. It's a rejection of God. It's a rejection because God has allowed them to live a way that they don't feel that they should have had to. And so they reject God because he's mean. And so that might sound like I'm oversimplifying things, but it really, it's like I said, it's never been the issue. It's not people who are genuinely seeking to know the truth. These are people that they're genuinely looking to substantiate their beef with God, by saying God doesn't exist, convincing themselves that God doesn't exist, chanting to themselves that God doesn't exist, and that is more where it's coming from. Because the reality is there. I mean, you have to be quite arrogant to believe that you could have such a large population of people from all different parts of life who have testified to the existence of God. You just have to be arrogant to say that all those people are just stupid. It's just there's no rationality, behind, discounting the opinions of millions of people from different walks of life, from different backgrounds, and you can talk about all the negative elements surrounding religion all you want, but again, okay, so you've been able to point out the negative elements of religion. That doesn't mean that God isn't real. It just gives you a reason to reject it, but it doesn't mean he's not real, because, just because the God that you fabricated in your mind doesn't exist, doesn't mean there's no God, so fabricate your reality all you want, but you can't avoid the reality that there are too many people, too many experiences from too many different walks of life, too many different cultures, to make some kind of, short-sighted, narrow-minded blanket statement that God doesn't exist.
Yeah. Okay, lots of hypocrisy in the church. There was another one on here that I'm skipping over. People want proof of his existence. Science speaks louder for this reason. You've kind of already answered that in depth. Lots of hypocrisy in Christianity. If that's who Jesus is, then why believe?
Well, again, it's, if that's who Jesus is, why believe? Yeah, exactly. Why believe? Why not reject? Why not reject the existence of God when you don't like him?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same argument, it's always the same argument. I sympathize, every person that I talk to that, hey, no, I've seen hypocrisy and I don't like that, and, don't want to be a part of that. And so, okay, but that doesn't, so rejecting Jesus isn't, that's not wisdom, just because, I mean, you could say that about everything in life, I'm not going to get an education.
Yeah.
I'm not going to allow my kids to have an education because they might get killed.
Yeah.
Say, and I hear, oh yeah, I could homeschool them, but okay, yeah, but that's an alternative. But what I'm saying is the more realistic comparison is you're not going to let your kids get an education because there have been school shootings, because they're not related to each other. Education is not related to school shootings. It just happens to be that school shootings happen. And it's the same thing with the existence of God. Just because there are Christian hypocrites doesn't it isn't
Yeah.
a reflection of the existence of God. It's a
Yeah, yeah.
reflection of the existence of humans, and the fact that we have the ability to make choices.
Yeah. Okay. They personalize the existence of God if they're never satisfied with the truth and seek more.
That will need to.
That's I think, yeah, we need some clarification on that one. Can you rephrase that statement? The question is,
I think there's some words missing.
yeah, the question is, what are some things that cause people to struggle with the existence of God? Here's another one.
Well, if they mean by the idea of personalizing the existence of God is that they make up their own idea of the existence of God.
Yeah,
then
yeah.
But that's what we're talking about anyway. In the broad spectrum, because people who don't believe God exists are making up their own existence of God.
Yeah.
So they're all kind of in the same category.
Yeah, yeah. They say, why would God allow this to happen? They look at the world and the evil in it and point fingers to God as if God didn't give us free will. So it's almost like they're not doubting the existence of God. They're just
that's
interesting
what I'm
because you
saying.
mentioned this idea of people having a beef with God. I was going to ask you that next before we moved on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that idea of man having how can we have a beef with God, really?
Well, I
can't personally say I've ever had a beef with God.
I have.
Have you?
Yeah,
Really?
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Tell me your story.
I remember a time in my life where I was not happy with the way things were going in my life because, I had gone through school and I had gotten good grades and things and but I was still having problems in life. It's like I'm a good kid. I've been a good kid. I've gotten good grades. I've gotten through school and I haven't done a lot of bad things. And this is, I'm experiencing these things in life. I don't remember what they were at the time. I just remember looking up in the sky and saying, God, I don't believe you're real. And then taking it the step further is I just point out my middle finger into the sky. And I said, if you're real, then kill me. Prove it, because I don't believe you're real. And just, very, very angry, at God because I blamed him for the things that I was going through in life as if he was doing it to me on purpose. That he was doing something to me. It was like he was trying to prove to me that, just, being a good person, doesn't mean you're going to have a good life, and by saying, I can still make your life suck if I want to, that's the way I took it, it was that kind of a thing. And, so yeah, having a beef with God's not hard at all.
Okay. So let's, move on here. We're at a good time. So, the next question is why. So biblically speaking, and maybe even, from your own experience, why is the existence of God a good thing? And then, we've kind of already answered the question through these struggles is why, what people struggle with when it comes to, why people have a beef with God. What's the issue? Why is God a negative? Why is the existence of God a negative? Right. And so answer the question, why is the existence of God a positive? Why is it a good thing?
The reason why I laugh at that is because that's one of those questions it's a question that is asked in utter foolishness. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. I mean, it's just base, non logical, intellectual, just because the idea of God, that's God is the primary mover and shaker of the universe.
Hmm.
So by definition, that's positive. No matter what that means, even if it meant that he's making people so that he can kill them, and he just keeps recreating them over and over again. He just keeps killing them over and over again, or like Sid on Toy Story, and just ripping his toys apart,
It's the
and
second time in like a week
you
I've
know
heard you use that analogy.
you know even if God is Sid, that's good, that's positive. I mean, because there is no such thing as negative when you're talking about first instance, just from a logical standpoint. There's just no such thing. To think that we can come up with an idea that would put the existence of God in a negative light is just foolish. It's foolish to think that, because we are created, and so the idea of trying to do that it's an unintellectual thing to do. It goes back to, I taught my kids when they were younger, that you get into an argument with somebody about something, and you're losing that argument. Don't go for cheap shots, of calling, name calling, that kind of approach, questioning people's intelligence or things like that, because it becomes out as you're a poo-poo head, you know. And
Pretty sure you
so
preached a whole sermon on this back in the day.
I don't know if I ever did a whole sermon on it, but just the whole idea of, because that you just prove that you have lost the argument because of a lack of intellect.
Mm.
You're too stupid to be able to win the argument. And so you're better off to just, yeah, hey, you know what, you're right. I don't really know what I'm talking about, and leave it at that, than to try to go after the you're a poo poo head thing, because you're childish. It just makes you childish. And so that question is like that, it's an admission of a lack of ability to understand life, objectively.
Mm-hmm.
Because that really is the issue, is that from that standpoint, because there is no such thing as negative, unless unless the creator determines that something is negative. So if the creator thinks something is good, it doesn't matter what we think about that thing. It's good. It is good. We can say that it's bad, but it doesn't change anything. It's still good. And at the end of the day, the only result we're going to have from that is a miserable life,
Mm-hmm.
of having to live thinking something is bad,
Mm-hmm.
and that you have no ability to change, no ability to do anything about it, except to live with the agony of that situation. And so God is positive by definition.
Yeah. So why is it that, so again, going back to this whole beef with God, why is it that so much of the, I don't know, I don't want to call it opposition, but it really is the opposition to God, is always putting God in a negative light, no matter how you spin it.
Because it's a childish approach to life.
So we're just talking about a vast number of people in the world that just,
Well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it's a vast number of people by any stretch of the imagination. 97, well, I don't know how much it is now. It might be like 80 something percent of the world believes in God.
mm,
And there are a lot of, there might be people, peppered into that
pretty
that have
big,
a problem.
still a pretty big number of people that don't believe in God. Just, I mean,
No,
or believe in a false
15%,
God.
15%.
It's a lot of people.
Is that a lot of people?
It's a lot of people.
Yeah, see, that's what I mean. This is what I mean by statistics, is that when you have if you to take 15%, take 15%, out of when you start looking at the real numbers, you're taking 100 people, and you can't say that 1.5 people out of 100. Well, that's still a big number, 1.5. That's big. Well, compared to what? What makes that a big number?
Yeah.
It's not a big number. It's just not a big number. And if you have a billion people, and several 900 and or 850 million people.
Yeah.
It's not a big number.
Yeah. Okay, so
it's not a big number.
We're getting kind of sidetracked.
Well, but the reason is because these are the kinds of, because what you're talking about now are the kind of unintellectual arguments that people use when trying to disprove or to try to say something about God. It's always, there's a lot of people like me, and it's like, well, number one, no, there's not. Number two, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so that's not evidence of anything. It's when I use that talking about the in terms of arrogance, when you're talking about a 85% of the world has a belief in an existence of God, and you think that 85% of the world is just stupid.
Right.
That's an arrogant statement. Because it's 85%, so compared to everybody, the only people that think the way you think are a very small portion of people. So for you to think that you've got the right answer, but you're in the minority is you're being more than likely, you're just have an overinflated ego. It's not, you're not on the right track.
So people that have a beef with God think that way. They're arrogant. There's clearly like a level of immaturity.
No, it's not. No. You can't. You can't make you're taking the arguments and kind of moving them around. But the idea of people who have a beef with God have a beef with God. The issue's not how many people have a beef with God.
Right.
That's not even important about how many people have a beef with God. And people having a beef with God doesn't numerically negate them. My point simply is you can't say there's a lot of people that have a beef with God, because first of all, you don't have any evidence to prove that. You're just making a statement. It's I think, it's like, well, good for you. I'm glad you think that way. I think that actually that there really is an elephant holding the world up. So prove it. Prove I'm wrong. Prove me. Change my mind.
Okay, so I want to talk about being born again. And that's kind of, so everything we just talked about, and the kind of the collection of answers and arguments against God is when it comes to the subject of being born again. First, I want to ask the question, what is being born again? Like, give us just total clarity. This is what being born again is, because Pastor Tom Payne mentioned, he did a Sunday school on it here. This is what being born again is. This is what being born again is not. And he made these. I don't know the whole study, but those statements caught my attention, and I put them in this on purpose, but hoping that you can answer some of those questions. Then I want to ask the question is, what is the prerequisite for being born again? And so start with what being born again is, what it's not, and then
Well, Jesus, the idea is to be born from above. That's the idea. We were born of the earth. We were born from human parents, and we had no interaction with God in that birthing process other than the miracle of birth itself. But in terms of relationally, we didn't have any contact with God in that birthing process. And so the idea of being born again is having that encounter with God. And so Jesus said, that which is spirit, that which is flesh is flesh. And so the idea, we're born the first time, we are born flesh. We're born without any really conscious awareness of God. In the true sense of the term, and we go through life, and I can say honestly, as a somebody who didn't come from a religious background, that I thoroughly understand the idea of not being spiritually minded. I mean, I had no People who grow up in a religious environment, or people that have taken drugs, or people that have been involved in different kinds of things, they may have had spiritual experiences, but they're not spiritual, not in the true sense of the term. Because I had spiritual experiences, but they were in ignorance. I didn't understand the dynamic. I just knew there was something happening that was beyond, just my five senses, but I didn't understand the dynamics of that. I didn't understand the principles behind that until I was born again. And so having an encounter with God, understanding the spiritual world, understanding that there are angels and demons, understanding that we are eternal beings, all those things, I didn't have that understanding until that moment when I was born from above. And so the idea, so that's the activity, the action of being born again, and the actual, so that the more down to earth, play by play, practical elements of being born again is simply that acceptance, which goes back to everything that we've been talking about, is that acceptance of that Jesus Christ died on a cross for my sins, rose again for my justification, and is the Son of God, who came to earth, and as God in the flesh, to make God known to humanity, so that all of us could be saved. And so the acceptance of that that's the factor that or the practical, that puts that all together. Is until you've had that, you don't have, your spirituality is meaningless until you've had that full encounter with God, through Jesus Christ. That has to be there. There has to be. There's no other alternative to that. And I know, and which is interesting, is in a lot of these, in all of every near-death experience, which is interesting because of all the research of near-death experiences, nobody has had an experience that doesn't follow the Judeo-Christian version. Right? So Hindus don't go and have a near-death experience where they get absorbed into nirvana, and a lot of the experiences that are the ultimate Hindu life after death experience.
Yeah.
They don't have those.
Yeah.
They never have those. What they have is more akin to the contact with a singular supreme being, light, colors, unconditional love, the independence of soul. So it's you're not absorbed. So every one of these people that have had these near-death experiences, there hasn't been one that just felt like they were being absorbed into the energy of the universe. None of those kinds of experiences. They were always a supreme deity, in a judicial sense. In other words, somebody that you're accountable to. And this feeling, like I said, of unconditional love, which is just, these are not story. They're not the narratives of other religions, and so that's just I forgot what your original
questions were.
thought.
What is being born again?
No,
What
that
is
part,
born again
being
not?
born again. But what prompted that comment that I just made? I can't remember what you said to that. As I was going to bring it back around, but I lost track of the.
Oh, what was the prerequisite for being born again?
Oh, no. It wasn't one of your main questions. You just made a comment. and I forgot.
I forgot it too.
But anyway. But anyway, so that's the idea, though, is that being born again is that acknowledgement of Jesus, and all of the plan of salvation, his that's that the acceptance of, the acknowledgement of, and the acceptance of. That's really kind of what I was getting to. I might have just got off on a tangent. Maybe you didn't say anything. Maybe it was just a tangent. But that idea, of that Jesus, that's what being born again is. So being born again is not just, accepting a religious faith, or believing in God or any of those kinds of things. It's very exclusively and very specifically centered around Jesus' death, resurrection, the plan of God for salvation since the beginning.
So what is the prerequisite for it? And the reason why I asked it like that is because when you talked about that, you mentioned specifically an atheist that felt unconditional love and felt uncomfortable with it, and so was compelled to reject it.
Yeah.
Like, so can somebody like that be born again? Why or why not?
Well, I would say somebody in that state is not able. They would have to see, because you're talking about the sovereignty of man at that point. Because
That's an interesting statement, yeah.
Because
Sovereignty
this
of
is the ability to be able to create your own reality. It isn't reality, but it is to you. It's absolutely is reality. But like all personal realities, they don't survive when it collides with reality. So in other words, you could think you can fly, and you can get up on top of a building and you can jump off, and then you are now colliding with the objective reality. Your subjective reality breaks down. It isn't real. And so it's the same thing. And so somebody, like what you said, can somebody like that be saved? Not as long as they're willing to continue to believe their subjective reality. No, they can't, because that's the whole point. The whole point is you have to believe in an objective reality. You can't believe in a subjective reality. And it's interesting, and this is why we make the decision we make. Like, I think of the different, like you talk about the idea of hypocrisy. Why would somebody think it's okay to be a hypocrite? Here are non-Christians that know that they're being hypocrites, and they know that that's wrong, and they know that it's wrong, that God thinks it's wrong. That if God exists, He thinks it's wrong, and so here here are non-Christians living in objective reality, and say, well, if God's real, you wouldn't act like that. True. Objectively so. That's true, but well, I should say semi-objectively, because the actual real objective reality is people do act like that, but my point being is that the person who's being the hypocrite is living in a subjective reality, because they think it's okay to do that. They don't, otherwise they would be hiding their hypocrisy. They wouldn't be just, expressing it publicly if they thought it was wrong. And so again, you're still looking at that same idea of subjective reality, and that's why you have the things that you have. Why you have conflicts between brothers and sisters, in church, and why people, want to start their own, fellowships, and all the kinds of things that happen within Christian circles. Is the reason why those things happen is because people are living in a subjective reality. They're not living in an objective reality, which is the only reality when it comes right down to it. And when they stand before God, they're going to give an account for all that, because God's going to hold us accountable to that objective reality. He's not going to say, so were you true to yourself? And he's not going to, that's not a question we're going to answer. what we're going to answer is it's funny because again in this book, it talks about how people are, they're always asked one question, what did you do with your life? And it's an open-ended question. It's not,
When they're
yeah,
in the experience,
in
yeah.
the new, yeah, in their near-death experience, it's always, what did you do with your life? And they're watching their life, and so their life is it's kind of in a moment of time, they're seeing all the history of their lives, and so they're seeing the things that they've done, and which is another thing I thought was interesting is in the majority of these, they only see the things that they've done that are bad. They don't see the good things, so they're like, wait a minute, what about my, when I did this or that or the other thing? And the response was that didn't matter. It's not important, but the things they did, and often the things it was that were brought before them was how they treated other people. And that's the thing that gets me the most is that, from an objective reality, biblically speaking, we know that there's really only two commandments. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And so when we don't love our neighbor the way we love ourselves, we're breaking half the commandments.
Yeah.
And so how can we look at that and just think that that's okay? When we're only, oh, but I love God, I love God. And, well, you can't love God, the Bible says, and not love your neighbor as yourself. So you are 100% disobedient to God when you can't love your neighbor as yourself. But yet that seems to be something that many people, even people who claim to be Christians, can do with relative ease. Treat people, with contempt. And they have a reason. They say, oh, they treated me this way, or they said this, or they said, so that makes it okay. So God's going to look down and go, no, no, no. I meant love your neighbor as yourself when your neighbor loves you like themselves.
Yeah.
That's not, that's not what he said. He said, I want you to do this, and so that it implies that it doesn't matter what they do to you.
Yeah.
You're still, that's, if you're going to be like God,
Yeah.
then that's what you're going to do. And that's another thing that they mentioned in the book is that, and I've always thought this as well, is that people who are like that, people that are okay with dissing other people, and are genuinely okay with not liking, they can just, push people out of their lives, because with the way they were treated or whatever. I think, how are you going to get along in heaven, when you find out the horrendous things that people have done that are there? How are you going to deal with that? Some horrible, serial rapist or child molester who repented, got his heart right, and you see Jesus embracing them and loving them, and you feel the love of God emanating into them and emanating out of them to other people. How are you going to respond to that? You who feel it's okay to, disconnect from people, heaven's not going to be heaven for you, and what I think is interesting is that again, and a lot of this stuff I know is subjective. It's not, because the Bible doesn't talk about these kinds of things, but there are boundaries. A lot of people experience boundaries, areas that they knew they weren't allowed to go, places that were like beautiful, but they weren't allowed. There was these like boundaries that they couldn't go there. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. There might be places. So like those pedophiles and serial rapists and all these horrible, nasty, awful people, they might very well be very, very, very close to God. And then there will be other people who never did such a thing, but are forgiving and loving and like Jesus, and they're going to be there and they're going to feel the fullness of God and who he is and his forgiveness and his unconditional love. And they're going to be able to experience that, but there's going to be other people that they couldn't come in there because if they came in there, it would be a bad experience for them. And so they won't be able to be allowed to be that close to Jesus because that love would destroy them. It wouldn't bless them. It would curse them. They would, and so they would have to be you know, cordoned off, to some other restricted area, while the unrestricted love of God is
Yeah.
everywhere. They would be restricted from being able to experience that for all eternity.
Yeah. There's a question here related to that, actually, specifically the love, the unconditional love. But what would make someone feel uncomfortable with feeling unconditional love
Well, good
from
question.
Jesus?
I haven't a clue.
Would that relate to history of trauma?
Well, again, like I said, that idea of unconditional love, I would say, maybe there's a 15-second delay on that. I go back and listen and think about what I just said. How does that make you feel? Because that's unconditional love. To
Yeah.
see Jesus loving on a child, a pedophile, see Jesus loving on that person and expressing unconditional love, and those people feeling the fullness of love, absolute unconditional fullness of love. And now it's your turn.
Mm.
I don't think I want that. That sounds sick to me. I would never want to have that kind of love inside of me. Because that's
Yeah.
unconditional love.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so were we just talking about what being born again is, or what born again is not?
What?
'Cause you kind of covered both.
What do you mean?
Because I asked two questions. Actually, I asked three questions, but the two questions originally was what is being born again? What is
Yeah.
being born again not?
Well, I didn't answer that yet. I
Okay.
haven't answered
Yeah,
what
let's
being
go
born
there.
again
Let's
is
go
not.
there.
Well, being born again is not religion. For many of the reasons that go into that last segment, of talking about, God loving a pedophile, is that religion can't bridge that chasm. There's no way. And you see it in church. You see it in church. And people who they get jealous, it's the classics things, pastor didn't shake my hand, he didn't say hi to me, so I'm going to go to another church.
Yeah.
So you just can't, religion can't bridge that gap. You have to feel accepted and loved and the center of attention, and anything that you don't like needs to be rejected by those people that are giving you that love and attention, and everything has to be done according to your template of how you should be treated. That's religion, and so religion isn't being born again.
So we've got about 20 minutes, and I want to talk about salvation in this last part. Actually, first I need to get one more question here on being born again. The miracle side of this, because what you talked about was a lot from the human perspective, and so you described this.
Yes, it was from the human perspective, but it is still,
Well, let me ask the question around, because you talked about, so you actually kind of answered the prerequisite questions. You come to an understanding, or in other words, you're like faced with an understanding of the reality of God, right?
Yeah.
Heaven, hell, Jesus, the cross, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you choose to accept it, right?
Yeah.
So what is the being born again? Because that word born is another, it's another word describing a beginning, but actually in this case it's a produced beginning. So it's not a preeminent beginning, it's a produced beginning. It actually literally means like begotten, or I didn't actually write the word down in my notes, but produced is the word, is you were produced by another, right? So, and Jesus says that.
So now this is where we need to be very, very careful, is that the idea of Jesus saving people, without that decision, that initial uncoerced decision,
So willing
to accept Jesus.
Yeah.
Not to accept your version of Jesus or your ideas of God or your ideas of how things should be, but the completely objective Jesus is who Jesus is, whether I like it or not. all facets, in all ways, shapes, or forms of that. Being able to if you are unwilling to do that, you will not have to worry about making the decision, because that decision will never become available to you. Because there has to be there has to be that acceptance, that total surrender to meet Jesus. It's interesting, as we were going around during the New Converts Bible study, and I was talking about people being able to hear from God, and it was interesting, to see that there were people that they'd never heard from God. And I think, well, I mean, hopefully they don't just misunderstood, because I don't. How can you have never heard from God but be a Christian? Because it's not religion. We don't learn how to be a Christian; we become one, and that's the miracle of Christianity, is that we become. We are born again. But but if you think about how so here's Nicodemus. He's a religious man. He's a ruler of the Jews. He's very intimately familiar with the scholarly element, the learning element of the religion of the God of Israel. But yet here is the Son of God standing in front of him, saying, "You must be born again," and he's saying, "I don't get that." You would think that it would be, he would just be going, "How do I do that?"
Yeah.
But he's not saying, "How do I do that? How do I be born again?" He's looking at this saying, "I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get this born again thing." And how can you go into your mother's womb and be born a second time? He's not, and Jesus even says, "You're a teacher and you don't even understand these things," because there's more to it than just simply being familiar with the theology of being born again. You have to come to a place to where you're willing to surrender to that.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why I'm asking the question that way, is because where is the miracle part of that? So a man's willing to accept that, and I'm just throwing this out as just a scenario, an example to play with, but the one who says, "I'd be willing to accept that, I just can't see me changing."
Right.
And so where's at what point does God get involved? You talked about this in your own.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that that question is the problem. Mm-hmm. I can't see me changing. You're not there yet. Mm-hmm. You're not there yet. You're still in the valley of decision. You're still at that place of whether you're going to decide to be born again. Mm-hmm. And I know that from personal experience, because I've been through that exact experience of saying, okay, I could change this, I could change that, I could change the other thing, but I could never change this. But part of the decision, was, okay, I am willing to ask you to come into my life, but you're going to have to change me. Mm-hmm. I can't do that. I can't change that. And there were specifics. I didn't realize, how wrong I was in what I thought I could do and what I couldn't do. But the idea of, I had, very clearly a line that, that's not going to happen. And it wasn't just simply, that's not going to happen because I don't have the willpower. It's, that's not going to happen because, I'm going to have a hard time trying to figure out why I shouldn't do that. Mm. And so you're going to have to. And so, but that's part of the decision. That's part of the decision. You're going to have to do this. This is, I'm willing, but you have to do this. It's not I'm willing, but I can't, I'm willing, but yeah. Reservation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's no, I have no reservations. I just don't know the procedure.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm okay. I'm in. And whatever that meant. And if it meant my life changing, in all those ways, it was okay. Yeah. That's fine. So be it. So it's a total surrender. See, without a total surrender, there's no surrender, because there's no in between. God is gracious. And so it's not that, you can't think about an encounter with God from some binary perspective that God's just, he's hiding behind some secret panel, and then you make all the right decisions, and then all of a sudden there he is.
Yeah.
It's not like that. That's not how it works. Is God is always trying to, and God was very gracious with me. It's funny, as I was listening to this for me was a very interesting part of this whole book, and maybe probably why, because I was thinking, man, I'm going to be telling people they should really read this, and then maybe people go, nah, whatever, it was a good idea. But I think for me, the reason why it was so profound is because I was having those near-death experiences. I just wasn't near death. I was very much alive and very much awake, but having those same kinds of encounters with God as I'm opening my heart to Jesus and allowing him to come into my life. I'm asking questions, and a lot of the answers, a lot of ways the questions were answered, because it was always this idea that I would ask these questions and God would answer them very patiently. I mean, incredibly patient. I'm frustrated, and God was completely patient. I never got this feeling of exasperation, that's why when I read the Bible and I read about, God judging people and stuff like that, and I hear this, emotion stuck into it. I'm like, that's not the Jesus that I met. I didn't meet a Jesus who got frustrated and exasperated and, yelled at people and, called them stupid or things like that. It wasn't that kind of a thing. There was always this sense of patience, and it doesn't mean that he didn't have any emotions. He did have emotions. He was human, and he had emotions. But God, speaking from the standpoint of God, I never, ever experienced that in that whatever, probably an hour time of just speaking with God. There was never a time where I felt God was exasperated with me, frustrated with me, and why don't I just get it? It was like God clearly understood that I was just as stupid could be, when it came to the things of God. I just didn't have a clue. I had no idea. So I'm asking questions, and God is just telling me, okay, I see that that's a problem, but you just need to trust me. I will be able to help you with that. And so that's part of the process. So God was revealing himself as I'm asking questions, but it's still, there was always, there was never a moment where it's like, okay, maybe for another time. There was always that idea of, are you going to do this? Are you ready to do this? And there was never a moment where it was like, nah, I'm going to, but it was always my decision. And these people in the near-death experience, there was a lot of them, they do you want to go back? And they would wrestle with it, and they would say, no, absolutely not. And then they would hear, a crying child, you have a child, they not the voice didn't say that, but they would just hear the crying child, and they'd think, oh, I need to go back for my child's sake, or a husband or a spouse, a wife or something like that, they would have this. And they would come back, they would come back. And some of the near-death experiences were very miraculous. One guy, fell out of a 2-story window, landed on his head, and he was gone. It was like, game over. And he was in eternity, but it was like, you have, do you want to go back? And he miraculously recovered. Absolutely miraculously recovered.
Dang.
And so, yeah. So just crazy.
I'm still trying to get through the idea of being given the option.
yeah. And so, but that's what I mean is
Golly.
that, so when I'm talking about salvation, it's an option.
Yeah.
It's always an option. There's never a time where, we can do that. We can, you need it. You never know when, but we can't make somebody get saved.
Yeah.
We can't say, no, listen, come on. Okay. Just come up with me and pray anyway. I know you're not ready, but just come and pray with me anyway. Because it's just a waste of time.
Yeah.
It's just an absolute waste of time. It's not going to do any good. People have to want They have to be at that place where they say, yes, I want to do this. And so when I'm, when people come to church, and they may come for weeks, and I just, you know, okay, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah.
And I try to explain to them. I try to give them the understanding. I try to help them to realize, how important the decision is. But I try to be that conduit. That like that near death experience, to be able to say, okay, these are the factors. These are the issues. So do you still want to wait? Okay, yeah, you still want to. Okay, so maybe a few other. Do you still want to wait? And let people make their own decisions.
Mhm.
But the decision is always the same. It's, you have to give your life to Jesus. There's no part way.
So the book title is Imagine Heaven. That was asked for. I put it on the chat, but Imagine Heaven. It is free on Audible. Just to
If you have an Audible
if you
account.
have an Audible account, yeah, and then I'm sure it's on.
If you don't have an Audible account, your first book is free anyway. So
there you go.
do it that way.
Couple comments here at the Bible study last week. I didn't catch the question first, but then I got it soon. And yes, I have had. Thank you for mentioning what heaven will be like when watching Jesus give unconditional love to those we might think don't deserve it. It was such a sobering explanation that it made me see how wrong I have been handling a situation. Very cool. Okay, salvation specifically. And this is more now the end, because, and this is hopefully, we'll leave it here, but the question isn't what is salvation, but what are we saved from? And the reason why I ask it that way is because, again, in the book of Hebrews, Paul mentions this statement in the beginning in Hebrews 1, and he says, you laid the foundations of the earth. And then he goes through this, and they will pass away. You'll fold them up like old clothes and discard them. And he's talking about the earth. So the earth is passing away. And then he goes in, so we should listen carefully in Hebrews 2 to the truth we have heard, or we may drift away from it. And for the message of God was delivered through angels, has always stood firm, and the very violation of the law and every act of disobedience was punished. Mm-hmm. So what makes us think we can escape if we ignore so great a salvation that was first announced by the Lord Jesus himself, and then delivered by those of us who heard him speak?
Right.
So now we have this testimony of people who not only believe in God, but now have their own experience of his existence.
Yeah.
And have experienced being born again, and are now testifying of that and trying to convince other people to essentially join this and become a part of it and experience it for themselves. But Paul leaves this with a warning. So what is the warning? What is the warning? What are we being saved from?
Ourselves.
What else?
Yeah, no, that's what we're being saved from. Ourselves. We are destined for hell.
Yeah.
For all eternity. And which I don't want to try to go into it, because it's a pretty, well, actually the book doesn't go into it either, but some of these people that had near-death experiences, they said, there were things that they can't even describe, of what hell is like. They can't even describe.
So these people saw both?
Well,
or some did?
Some did, some didn't. Different people had
Yeah.
different experiences. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that both of them had a welcoming committee. And
Both hell and heaven.
yes. And
Wow.
but the welcoming committee for heaven, obviously they want to love you. They want to love on you, and care for you, that kind of thing. But the welcoming committee for hell wanted to hate on you and do bad things to you, and the more you resisted, the more glee they had in you fighting them, and then when you stopped fighting, they kind of gave up and got bored. But the more you fought, the more it was. And so it's quite gruesome, it's some of the thing. And again, that's all subjective,
Yeah.
that's near death experiences are not biblical, in terms of, their
You're not gonna build a doctrine
their
off
thing.
of them.
You can't build a doctrine off of it.
Yeah.
But the very eye-opening when you start thinking about, oh, how bad can hell really be? Well, you're talking about a place where God isn't,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there are
yeah.
no rules.
Yeah.
So, let your imagination run wild. You
Yeah, we
know,
actually did a podcast, I think last year. No, not last year. It would have been the year before last, actually. We did a podcast on hell. We talked quite a bit about that. It was pretty good. So, plug for that podcast. I don't remember what it's
wherever it
called.
is, yeah,
Remember,
if you can find it.
it's in the,
And trying to find things on YouTube's not easy.
no, no, it's not.
So
Although, if you go on our channel, the little search bar works pretty good. If you look
yeah,
up hell, I think the
yeah,
hell was in the title. I think.
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, but anyway, I just, so the whole idea of heaven and hell, the finalities of these places. See, this is the thing I thought was very interesting about this book. This book did not try to try to deal with the idea of are you saved, aren't you saved, and trying to push that. It was just simply about near-death experiences, heaven and hell, these issues, what people experienced. Some of his personal opinions about, you know, uh, some not summary, but his take on what these people were observing and experiencing and things like that. But the to me the whole thing it's just very, very sobering from the standpoint, especially for me as a Christian, and having absolute confidence that these things are true, and seeing how like for me, a lot of even just the idea of rewards was even more. I don't want to go. I don't want there to be anywhere in heaven that I can't go. You know, and so if that's even a possibility, and you can just brush that off and say, oh, that's not true. God's not like that. And well, okay, make up your own God and live in your own reality. And then when you stand before the ultimate reality and you find out you're wrong, then there's nothing you can do about it. So I would rather deal with it on this side than on the other side. But it really did make me think a lot about, those, what I mentioned about those two commands, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself, that is going to be sort of um, the focus of all judgment that we experience, in eternity. And the Bible talks about how, when we stand before the judgment seat of Christ, this is a time of the distribution of rewards, but it's also the idea of rewards, have no merit if being rewarded just simply means, you did good.
Yeah.
You did good, you didn't do good. But now everybody gets to do the same things and everything is the same. No, the idea of rewards has to be privilege. There has to be privilege, responsibility, leadership, all those kinds of factors that the Bible talks about, being over so many cities, those kinds of things. And you think, well, if you can be the ruler over certain cities, then you can probably decide who can go to those cities and who can't.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what would be the point of being the ruler of a city that there's no rules?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but anyway, so yeah, I think it's so very sobering. The whole idea of God being born again. I thought that was good that you wanted to do a reset thing, because it really, when it comes right down to it, it really is. How much it's everybody knows this. That heaven is all about how much we're like Jesus. And the only factor that is in question is, how important do we think that is?
Yeah.
That really is the only factor that makes, and when it comes right down to it, that makes a difference between Christian denominations, is how much we are to be like Jesus, when we pass out of this life, and so, for those who want to, try to get, as much of the world as they can,
Yeah.
I have no doubt you'll wish that you hadn't done that.
Yeah.
So
Very cool. Very good. All right. We're at time and we appreciate you joining us tonight. Thanks for the questions, the comments. We encourage you to join us again next week. We'll be here live, new Tuesday, new topic. And, if you have questions, even after the fact, feel free to throw them in the comment section. If the comments or the questions are unrelated, it might inspire a whole podcast topic, I'm happy to take those kinds of suggestions, and obviously, throw them in there as soon as you can, and we'll consider those. But yeah, we're here for your questions. We're here for your to be a resource and a help for you personally, and so we appreciate joining us. We encourage you to join us for our midweek service. That's tomorrow night, every Wednesday night, midweek service. It starts at 7 o'clock. We get here an hour early, and you can come and join us and be a part of that in person. We encourage you to do that, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon.